Hey everybody, welcome back to another SAT video. This is for the 2024 practice bundle number 6, module 2, question 24. The function f is defined by f of x, which is equal to a times the radical x plus b, where a and b are constants. In the xy plane, the graph y equals f of x passes through the point -24, 0, and f of 24 is less than 0. Which of the following must be true? And they give us a bunch of options where f of 0 is equal to 24, f of 0 is -24, a is greater than b, or a is less than b. So let's try and figure this one out. First, I will move over to this side. For these types of problems, usually it is best to try and plug in anything that they give us, any values, any points, that sort of stuff, right? So let's actually start with this one right here. F of 24 is less than 0, right? So when you have a function f of x, right, whenever they give you f of 24, usually that means you can just plug in the 24 or whatever number happens to be here where x is, right? And they're telling us that this is less than 0, right? So if we rewrite that based on the information that they give us, that means a times the square root of b plus 24. I just switched it up. Instead of doing x plus b, I just did b plus x, but mathematics the same. That is less than 0, okay? So based on this, we don't really have a lot of information to go by, but there is a few things that we can kind of infer, right? One thing that we can infer that might not be super obvious is the fact that they gave us this square root symbol, right? And usually the mathematical convention in square roots is square roots usually will evaluate to a positive number, right? For example, like if we have the square root of 36, we will always kind of write that as the square root of 6, right? Only if the problem states plus or minus in front of a square root, like 36, then we would have to, think about, okay, we would have two solutions, right? Plus or minus 36. Like you can imagine when you have the quadratic formula, you've probably seen the plus or minus in front of a square root. But unless otherwise specified, we only care about the positive root, right? We only care about, say for this example, square root of 36, we would only care about 6 because in this problem they didn't specify plus or minus, right? So the same deal applies here, right? Over here we don't have a plus or minus sign in the front of this radical, so we know that, okay, this entire term has to evaluate to a positive number, right? So that's one thing that we know. This right here, that's going to be a positive number. Okay? But remember what we were told, right? We were told that f of 24 is less than 0, right? So this entire left side is going to evaluate to some number less than 0. And we could then know, all right, if it's some number less than 0, that means this is going to be this entire expression, right? So this entire expression, that's going to be a negative number, right? Because if this part is positive, in order for this entire expression, right, to be negative, we must then assume that a is going to be negative, right? So that means we can deduce that if a is negative, that means a is less than 0, right? Because any number less than 0 is negative. So I hope that makes sense. This one is a bit more theoretical, so if you're having trouble figuring this one out, I would just kind of run through it in your head a few more times, and hopefully you'll get the idea. But that's only half of it, right? Now let's try and figure out some more information, right? Because we not only were given this bit of information, but we also were given this little hint, right? That the function f of x passes through the point -24, 0. That's the same, whatever they give you, y equals f of x, that's just the way that they are telling you that f of x is plotted on an xy coordinate plane, but it would work the exact same. We would just plug in -24 for x, except this time we would know that this would equal 0, right? Because we know that we have an x value and then we have a corresponding y value, right? Or the output of x at this value x, or the output of the function, I'm sorry, at this value x, right? So when we write that out, that's going to look like 0 is equal to a times the square root of b minus 24, right? Again, I just flipped it just to make it a little bit neater, right? So we know now that this is going to be equal to 0. And we also know that this has to be some negative number, right? We know that since a is less than 0, we know that a is a negative number, right? So with that being said, we can kind of figure out, okay, something times a negative number is equal to 0, right? Well, the only way that two numbers can be multiplied together and equal 0 is if one of the numbers is 0, right? Or one of the terms evaluates to 0, right? So we already know that this can't be 0, right? Because remember we figured out that a is going to be less than 0. So that can't be 0, meaning this term, right, has to evaluate to 0, right? So that means that the root of b minus 24 is going to equal 0. And now we just can solve for b, right? So we can square both sides, and the square root and the square cancel out. 0 squared is 0. So then we are left with b minus 24 is equal to 0. And then we can plus 24 on both sides, right? That's how we solve equations. So that cancels out with the minus 24, and then this becomes, what does it become? It becomes b is equal to 24, right? So let's just quickly summarize what we figured out. We figured out that a is less than 0 and b is equal to 24, right? So with this information now, we can figure out which of these makes the most sense, right? So f of 0 is equal to 24. Well, we weren't able to figure that out, right? And we can also weren't able to get enough information to figure this out, right? Is a greater than b? Well, if a is less than 0 and b is equal to 24, that means a is a negative number, and a negative number cannot be greater than 24, right? So that doesn't make sense. And then we're left with a is less than b. Does that make sense? Well, is any negative number going to be less than 24? That sounds about right. So there is your answer. Thank you again for watching. Let me know if there's anything I can do to improve these videos or make them better. As always, check out Khan Academy. I'll link it in the description of every video I make because they are a great resource and they will help you learn pretty much anything, especially SAT. As always, thank you for watching.